So inside the body of a muscle, we have a bunch of muscle cells, all arranged in a bundle of fibers. Each fiber is made up of a series of sarcomeres, and they have two kinds of muscle cells. Some are called thick filaments, and some are called thin filaments. The thick myofilaments have a protein called myosin, which sticks off with these projections called myosin heads. It's kind of like treads or fingers. The thin myofilaments have a chemical called actin. As the thick muscle fibers contract, the myosin heads grab onto the thin filaments and pull them, kind of like the treads of a tire grabbing the road and pulling it forward. When enough of these fibers pull, we get enough force and the muscles start to move. This requires the use of calcium and a lot of energy, which we get from ATP. In order for muscles to generate enough ATP, we need two things: sugar and oxygen. The sugar we get from our diet, either in the form of glucose or from our fat storages, and the oxygen we get from respiratory and cardiovascular system. This process is called aerobic metabolism. If we run out of oxygen, or our muscles need more than we can get them, say if we're running a marathon, the body may switch to an anaerobic metabolism, which is a much less efficient way of getting energy out of the sugar and ATP. So what starts this contraction? Well, it all starts when an impulse comes from a nerve cell. The nerve cell sends a signal from the brain and it meets the muscle at what's called the neuromuscular junction. The muscle will begin contracting once the impulse from the nerve meets a certain threshold, and that's called the threshold stimulus. Think of it like a nerve asking the muscle fiber to move. If the nerve whispers really, really quiet, the muscle's not going to hear it, so nothing happens. But when the nerve yells, the muscle will react and the contraction will start. This happens with each individual muscle fiber, and it's like an on or an off switch. The fibers don't just pull harder or softer, they just pull. If we need a muscle to pull harder, we tell more fibers to start pulling. Not all muscle fibers have the same threshold stimulus, so we don't have the opposite happen and pull like we're lifting lots of weight when we're only trying to lift a cup. All right, quick recap. Nerve cells tell muscle fibers to fire. Muscle cells release calcium. That calcium helps the actin and the myosin to connect, and the filament pulls, causing the muscle fiber to contract. When a muscle fiber tries to contract, one of two things will happen. It will either actually contract, or the muscle will shorten, as in when you lift something up, or the tension will increase, as if you try and lift something but it's too heavy, like lifting a big table. A contraction that actually causes movement or changes the length of a muscle is called an isotonic contraction. Keeping the same length but increasing your tension is called an isometric contraction. On the topic of movement, if we want our muscle cells to work at their best, we've got to use them. Use them enough and you can start to get muscle growth, and that's called hypertrophy. If we don't use muscles, eventually we run the risk of atrophy or muscle shrinking. Here are two pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger, one while he was in his bodybuilding prime, and one during a recent TV interview. See the difference? If you don't regularly exercise, you can easily lose muscle mass. But it's not as simple as pick up the heavy things and put them back down again. There are two types of exercises that we need to do for each of our muscles if you want to keep them in great working order. Endurance training improves a muscle's ability to function over prolonged periods of time. It allows oxygen to get into the muscles more efficiently, and the muscles to clear away waste products. You can do this by doing multiple reps with lower weights, or things like going for a run. Endurance training typically won't improve muscle growth. Strength training will improve the size of each muscle fiber by increasing the number of myofilaments. This will cause muscles to get bigger. The way to do this is by working the muscles with heavy loads, like lifting weights.